Welcome back, Scott. Last week we touched up on supplements and whatnot, and I wanted to pick up your brain on one part of supplements, which are fat burners. And the most important part, do fat burners actually work? Maybe you want to touch up on what would you class as a fat burner? Uh, what do people need to look into? What do we know that definitely work? What do we know that definitely doesn't work? We have all kind of stuff like, hey, you eat a bit of chili peppers and you're going to lose more body fat and whatnot. So maybe let's start with what would you class as a fat burner? And is there a place for anything like that in someone's goal? Because predominantly everyone wants to look a bit leaner, more jacked, and fat burners definitely play on someone's mind at that stage.
Yeah, no, definitely. A fat burner to me would be something that increases the oxidation of adipose tissue. A lot of supplements work by reducing body fat, but via different mechanisms. Some of them actually increase the mobilization of triglycerides or fatty acids. They don't actually burn them. They just get them they get the triglycerides out of the fat cell and into the bloodstream so it can be then oxidized further. People classify those as fat burners as well, but they're actually not theoretically fat burners. They're more like fat mobilizers. But there are definitely some that work. Usually you're going to find they're illegal in most places. Um, the OTC stuff that is touted as a fat burner, there are some that are slightly better than others, but it's usually a marketing gimmick how it's worded. You know, in a laboratory, in vitro or something like that, they could show increased fat oxidation or possibly fat mobilization. But in the real world, it usually doesn't amount to anything. If you're talking about things like, chili peppers and stuff like that, they're going to work by getting the body's temperature up. But really, it's going to be such an insignificant amount that the real world results of something like an OTC fat burner is going to be incredibly disappointing.
You mentioned this word oxidation. So how do we improve that? Is there anything we can do without supplements to begin with, and then transfer our goal into use of supplements?
Well, kind of like in the last video when we were talking about supplements in general, and I mentioned that I would much prefer somebody ate food before introducing a supplement, because to me a supplement is to supplement what's missing out of the diet. I feel the same way when you're trying to increase fat oxidation or fat loss phase. I would rather we get the energy balance equated properly to yield results before I would right away jump on a quote unquote supplement. Um, I'm very much a big fan of less is more whenever I can. I would rather get the most amount of results from the least amount of efforts, and or supplements and or accessories and or whatever. I want to maximize what we can get with minimal tools before we start reaching in the toolbox to get something else. So the first thing I would do, and what I just don't see many people doing, is I would make sure that the energy balance makes sense. You can reduce body fat by caloric restriction or energy output or a combination of the two. And it doesn't have to be aggressive. It all depends on the person, the timeline, the goal, etc. But I would right away make sure that that's in play, because that can very often get results without the need of anything else. And when you get into the fat burners that actually work, depends where you live. The majority of us are getting into issues with law, and we're going to potentially get into issues with health markers, because you're going to end up taking a drug to yield the fat loss results you're looking for. Now, of course, they can be done um, in some ways that are better than others. but it's still a drug. You're still taking something and you might not need it. So I'm a big fan of making sure you got the foundation set first. And then if it's necessary, you reach for the best tool for the job.
What are the actual benefits from fat loss? Because we've touched on this a lot, that there is a point of, so to speak, no return when you get too lean and everything is just starting to crash. But why would anyone even want to lose a bit of body fat? Because we see a lot of big dudes, girls, extremely fit and athletic. Why would they want to lose a little bit of body fat? Is there a benefit to health?
Like everything else, it depends. There's a spectrum. I mean, obviously, somebody that's obese is going to have poorer health markers than someone that is not. The accumulation of adipose tissue, it starts to cause issues with inflammation in the body, especially if it's visceral fat around the organs and stuff like that. There's a point of being overly fat and causing a problem, and there's a problem with being too lean. So it really comes down to the person. Now, if you just look at the general health guidelines, the range of an accepted fat percentage is quite large. And that's because there's not going to be detriments just because you have a little bit of body fat. The detriments come when you become overly fat or morbidly obese, just like they become a problem if you get excessively lean. The influencers that we see on social media that have six packs and all these things that are that way all year round, like we talked about before, they're not natural. So they're able to support their hormonal system, their body in general, with some sort of supplementation, pharmaceutical protocols of some sort. So it's not a real depiction of what's really, you can get away with. The everyday person that's not shredded all year round, they're probably actually potentially, well, not even potentially, most likely they're actually quite healthy. It's the opposite end of the spectrum. The issues from health markers kind of become a thing. The other thing with body fat is, I think, aside from health markers, which again usually have to have pretty high levels of body fat causing problems with health, but I think the biggest driver nowadays is just vanity. People want to look leaner. It's got nothing to do with their health. I mean, if somebody's health is, hindered from their fat, the amount of fat they're carrying, you can tell by looking at them. Like, the people that are just walking around that look like the everyday average Joe or whoever, they don't look at the reason they want to lose body fat is most likely a vanity thing.
Something you just kind of mentioned that being too lean, most likely they're not natural and not healthy. I see a lot of this specifically in guys where they have a chronic thyroid issues and they don't even know that because they've just been in really high, low calorie intake for a very, very, very long time. And now they can't even think clear. So, like, I have somewhat decent physique, but I'm nowhere near what I would class lean. And if you have a little bit of imagination, six pack is always there. But it's because I've been like that for 20 over years.
Mm.
It's like you have a different, like a threshold. Do you want to touch up on the difference between fat loss and weight loss? Because what you just mentioned at the very beginning is like calorie intake and energy expenditure. And people always think that to lose body fat, they need to eat less, move more. Whereas sometimes it means fuel yourself correctly and expend energy with intent instead of running yourself in the ground. So what is the difference between fat loss and weight loss and benefits of either or?
Well, fat loss is literally that. You're reducing the amount of fat on the body, the adipose tissue on the body. Weight loss is the entire mass on your body. So you could step on a scale and weigh 225 pounds and then put a backpack with books on and weigh 235 pounds. Your total mass changed, but your body fat percentage didn't actually change. So people always seemingly get hung up on that. They always are getting caught up on this weight loss versus fat loss. It's very easy to skew body weight. Body weight is largely made up of things like glycogen, sodium, fluids. I mean, when I'm coaching weight class athletes, we can move their body weight 10% in a matter of a few days. So if you're a 200-pound person, I can move you 20 pounds in a matter of a few days. In fact, I had a guy this year, a high level athlete. We moved him 21 pounds in 14 hours. So none of it was body fat. Now, what else gets complicated or confused or misinterpreted is there's fat mass, which is adipose tissue, and there's fat-free mass, which is everything but. So if I am 200 pounds and I chug a liter of water and I step on a scale, now I'm 200 and whatever, 202 pounds, I just gained 2 pounds of fat-free mass. But it's not muscle, and it doesn't really matter. But by definition, I've improved my ratio of fat-free mass to fat mass by just putting more fluid in my body. Same thing happens if you eat. If you have a gigantic dinner and then go to bed, you're going to wake up heavier than normal. You didn't gain fat. You are just having more mass in your digestive system and more water retention, all that from the change of electrolytes, etc. So the difference is literally that it's adipose tissue and everything else. And the scale is not a very good way of measuring fat loss. It's a very good way of measuring mass, but not actual adipose tissue. I use a scale with my clients all the time, but I use it in conjunction with a lot of other metrics, and it's just adds a piece of the puzzle to our, the equation we're trying to create. So I take, especially with females, I have them check body weight every single day, because that's going to give them an idea of the fluctuations that they're going to see no matter what. It doesn't matter to me if you eat the exact same thing every single day to the right down to the grain of rice. If I take you in my climate right now that's snowing, and I go drop you off in California at the sun, you're going to weigh something different tomorrow. Even though you changed nothing, your climate changed, your atmosphere changed, the environment changed. The body's always in search of that homeostasis. And if it has to adjust body water or whatever, it will do that to maintain heart rate, blood pressure, pH levels, all these things. So your actual body weight fluctuates in accordingly. So I think anybody that's caught up in this, they really need to understand what they're measuring so they know how to implement the right approach or the right adjustments on the training protocols. And that's why I feel anyways, or think that people are too quick to jump on fat burners before they've got their energy equations established. Because I've had top level athletes, literally world-class athletes, say, blah, 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 I'm not losing body fat or whatever. And then I look at their caloric intake and their energy output, and everything is a mess. It to me is the foundation, and it's the thing that's missed the most. So if that's in place, then you will get obvious benefits out of that, but you have to know how to measure it, because if you just look at the scale to do so, you might not see it. I could increase any sort of training parameter around somebody, or even increase their milligrams if they're enhanced, and not change their caloric intake, and their increased muscle mass would create an energy deficit automatically. And people that are constantly starving themselves, like you mentioned, these guys that are causing like thyroid downregulation, that's just because the body is trying to adapt, and they might not even see their scale weight dropping anymore. It'll eventually stop dropping. They're like, I'm not losing any weight more, and they'll cut it even more. Now, I see that much more with females, but I work with more females than males, and that could be why. But that's one of the biggest issues is they don't think they're making progress anymore, so they reduce their calories more, or their coach reduces their calories. That's the most common thing. They want to see a picture every Friday, body weight picture, and you didn't lose weight this week. Take away 100 calories or 100 carbs, usually carbs, and go run on the treadmill. So they're increasing the energy output via aerobic activity and then taking away the most predominant fuel that the body needs to perform that activity, and then further causing stress in the system, and then wondering why body weight's constantly stalled. It's got nothing to do with fat loss.
Yeah, this one is interesting because people still don't. I think there is not enough conversation about explaining that body fat and body weight are two different things. And I had this one really long fight almost with one of my guys about body fat percentage. And he was always trying to get under sub 10% and this and that. And he was always measuring himself on one of these, I don't even know how they called now, those handheld devices. So what I
Yeah,
started to do before he did that, night before, I would tell him to just eat junk. And
yeah,
every single day it was like, oh, I'm getting leaner. I'm like, well, you're not. You're just replenishing your glycogen store. Like, you should be measuring yourself at the end. I know exactly what you need to look like. You are just too obsessed with this number.
yeah.
Uh, is there like a top three list of fat burners in a market over the counter that you would be willing to discuss and maybe say, you know what, if it gets to this point where your nutrition is right, your training is right, your stress recovery, everything is in place, this little addition might elicit another 1-2% benefit in body fat loss. Is there anything like that?
Uh, that's a good question. It would largely depend on the geographic location of the individual. Like, for example, in Canada, I can get a certain supplement over the counter that's illegal in the US. And then the US has one that they can get over the counter that is illegal in Canada. So that would kind of vary for sure. I mean, you could go to Europe and half the stuff is available over the counter. So that could vary. So it kind of depends on where the audience is listening from. But in terms of like vitamins and nutrients and stuff like that, something that we could probably all agree on that is probably legal everywhere, and it's not including some of these, a little bit more rare examples. I would say caffeine is probably the only one you've got that's going to be noticeably beneficial. From there, it would really, really come down to some meticulous measuring of variables to see if you're getting much of an improvement. But there could be something in green tea extract, but personally, I wouldn't bother because it's so insignificant. But what I would consider looking at is the client's overall dietary intake, because if there's any risk of any nutrient deficiencies, correcting those can actually indirectly make a huge impact on stuff like that. Because again, the body is always in this search of homeostasis. And if there's deficiencies that's making the machine run less, efficiently, it's going to cut corners and make adjustments in order to keep certain things still going. And if it has to, downregulate something like, say, for example, thyroid, to keep pH levels and blood pressure normal, you could see a hindrance in your fat loss approach. So I would be making sure that the dietary strategy makes sense and supplementing whatever is potentially deficient there. And then making sure, and this is another one that people miss, is making sure that you've got iodine in your diet. And the best way to get that is to use iodized table salt, because your thyroid needs that. And your thyroid needs carbohydrates. It benefits wildly from carbohydrates in the conversion of T4 to T3 at the liver. So if you have the proper energy balance, iodized salt, carbohydrates, and the energy surplus, or sorry, the energy equation to energy output, etc., all make sense, you probably are going to be making progress with fat loss. And it's not that easy to cause a stall. I mean, you have to be getting down to the extreme levels of leanness for that to not be enough. And that's why this is becoming so popular, because people are stepping on stage. Bikini competitors, the level of leanness they need to achieve now is much, much leaner than it used to be. That's not achieved naturally anymore. Anyone that's saying that is lying. They're straight up lying. Either they used to use something to get where they are now, or they're using something and they're justifying it in their mind that they're natty. There's winning now is extreme, and that's going to require some sort of drug support.
Yeah, there is a lot. I've seen a lot of girls, and they go like, "Yeah, I'm natty," and they advertise every single peptide on the planet, and you're like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
"You're still
yeah.
injecting something." It's like it's not gonna work. Do you want to touch up on how caffeine actually works? Because is it important to have caffeine in a pill form? Is it important to have caffeine in a coffee? How much dosing? Is there something that's gonna work, something never gonna work? Or is it something that's not as standardized, like we know with certain things, it's body weight per such and such.
Mm.
Does caffeine have something similar?
Well, from a fat loss point of view, I'm not aware of a threshold to get a fat loss effect from caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant. Any stimulant is going to increase central nervous system, and that's going to have some impact on fat loss in general. It's a systemic thing. It's not going to be massively impactful, but where caffeine could and usually does shine better is its ability to improve performance. And I do know that with training parameters, there is some threshold with caffeine, like 4 to 6 milligrams per kilo has been well seen to improve training performances. So if taking caffeine keeps you alert, keeps you focused, makes you train harder, that's going to all indirectly yield to more fat loss. And I would be using caffeine under that sort of under that thought process that that's how it's working for me. I wouldn't just take caffeine, go lay on my couch and expect fat loss to become, happening miraculously. There's maybe one drug on the planet that could do that, and most people don't want anything to do with it. Caffeine's not one of them, but caffeine is going to be effective from its overall impact on you and what you're doing. That's kind of really its main claim to fame.
4 to 6 milligrams per kg sounds a lot
It's
of
high.
caffeine.
Yeah, it's high. It's high. I mean, and it's an acute bolus. Now, I don't think you want to be taking it all the time. I use it in some clients for, like I said, an acute thing, like maybe for a game day or something like that. It wouldn't be my all day, everyday intake, but they have studied it and affects that high, and it does improve anaerobic performance.
Right. Interesting. Any other supplements? I think
Uh,
before we go there, you just said 4 to 6 mgs per kg is kind of great. Let's just make sure that it's not the starting point. You can work up to that. So
it shouldn't be a starting point, but I mean,
for me,
I,
that
I
would be
mean,
700 over 700 milligrams of caffeine. My head
mhm.
would explode.
Yes, and obviously it's going to be an individual sort of experimentation is going to be needed. Some people are very sensitive to stimulants. Some people are not. Some people can take 1,000 milligrams and it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, you can buy caffeine over the counter where I live, 200 milligram tablets. It's zero restrictions on that. I know people that, myself included, when I do use a pre-workout, which is really freaking rare, but if I do, it is literally a caffeine tablet. I drop it into my coffee, and that's my pre-workout. That's about 300 milligrams, 350, and it's that's on the lower end. That's probably 3 or 4 milligrams, not even per kg for me. But it's enough. I don't need 600, but I mean, you could, and I bet you could even go higher, but that's been studied in athletes and it's been shown to be a benefit. I don't know what the upper threshold would be, but I'm sure it's two or three
There have
times
been a
that. But
couple people in UK who bought powder form and they thought it was creatine or something like that. And
yeah,
it led to lethal consequences. So they actually literally like 15 grams of caffeine,
right,
you know.
yeah, 15. Right, so 15 grams. That's massive. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, of course, there's a D rating for all the drugs, but I mean, caffeine is relatively no issue. I mean, assuming you're thinking to some degree.
So, any other supplements you can kind of put your name to, like that you feel would be beneficial? So you touched up on something that's legal side. Like I said, in my country when I was growing up, ephedrine was very, very highly ranked, and that was predominantly used for energy purposes for long distance drivers. And
Mm-hmm.
now majority of countries have banned it. But I'm aware that there used to be this caffeine, ephedrine, and
Mm-hmm. The ECA stack. Yeah.
good old ECA stack. What the
Yeah.
hell is it? Is it still legal somewhere? And if it's not, why isn't it?
It is still legal here where I live, but what happened is so the history of the ECA stack is they were taking 25 milligrams of ephedrine with 200 milligrams of caffeine, and that was the fat burning dose. I don't buy into that. I don't know the details of the studies. I mean, I remember them years ago, but I haven't looked at them in so long. But I think that was going to be very specific to an individual's body weight because I use these stacking clients all the time, and I do not go to 25 milligrams and 25 milligrams of ephedrine, 200 milligrams of caffeine right out of the gates. We always start low and work it up. Here in Canada, you can buy ephedrine in 8 milligram tablets. So, and we can buy caffeine tablets at 100 or 200. So I very oftentimes, I always ensure that the energy balance is correct because to me, that is the biggest thing. If I know that that's there and we're now looking to start putting some supplements where I live, my OTC supplement for fat burning is going to be ephedrine and caffeine because that is OTC here. Like I say, that's one of the ones that I was referring to. That's illegal in the States, but not in Canada. So I would use that one because I can go get it, at the grocery store. And depending on the body weight, I would start somebody with an 8 milligram tablet of ephedrine and 50 or 100 milligrams of caffeine and see what we get. And if it's yielding results, then that's it. We just ride that. If we need to go up more, we go up more. I don't know why it became banned in other places. I think probably from abuse. And I also think that ephedrine is an ingredient used in a lot of other recreational drugs. And so they're just trying to kind of keep their hands on that to prevent other problems. But ephedrine is relatively safe, provided there's not a predisposition to any sort of heart issues in your family, and you're not taking hundreds and hundreds of milligrams. So I guess for here, what I would say is the EC stack is probably something I would suggest people look into if they're at that point where they need to add some sort of supplementation. And here it's OTC. If it's illegal where you live, then I don't know. I don't condone you break the law, but people do their own thing.
I remember a very long time ago, I was having a conversation with one of the professional bodybuilders, and he was talking to me about these things, and I'm like, "Don't you get a calm down or something like that from it?" He was like, "Well, you just take next one." I'm like, "Okay," but he had done it for like 3 decades, and he's still fit, healthy. All his kids are fit, healthy, jacked to eyeballs. It's interesting because feels like from everything you have mentioned so far, it's dose dependent. Be mindful of your health, make sure everything is in place, that your nutrition, your habits, your training, everything is lined out for you to be as healthy as you can. And then you can start thinking about these kind of things instead of, like you say, right out of the gate, taking everything there is because you want a miracle within 2, 3 weeks. And you might end up having a lot of health implications because you most likely are already in calorie deficit, most likely already running yourself into ground, probably not in a good place mentally if you're not in a healthy environment with your food habits and body fat levels. So all this might end up to some kind of risks. So what are those side effects that people can expect from overdoing these things?
Well, it depends on which ones they're overdoing. But if we're talking something like in ephedrine caffeine, what you're going to see is you're going to see an increase of heart rate. And with ephedrine, it's a beta agonist, but not beta two specifically like other drugs like clenbuterol, for example. It's beta one and beta two. So that means it has a systemic effect, and you can get blood pressure issues as well with ephedrine. Again, it's dose dependent for sure. All the lethal levels of drugs are going to be dose dependent, but it doesn't matter how much you take. It's going to cause those effects no matter what. It's just the dosing can determine how much of an effect you get, both good and bad. And there's thresholds for, everything. But I would always have and suggest people, if they're taking something like ephedrine, like a beta agonist, that they're monitoring, which they should be doing anyways, resting heart rate and blood pressure and things like that, because we want to know what effect did this do. If I gave you 8 milligrams of ephedrine and 50 milligrams of caffeine, and your resting heart rate went from 62 to 64, or 65 or whatever. I mean, I'm not looking for a one-time thing. I'm always looking at averages over time. Then we know that a very nominal dose had a very nominal effect on things that I would deem concerning, like not concerning, things that I would want to be monitoring, like blood pressure and heart rate. We don't want to see those get too high. So if a nominal dose causes a nominal effect, then we know what kind of runway we have to work with. But it's really going to be like anything with a stimulant. It's things like blood pressure and heart rate, possibly anxiety, stuff like that can kind of become a problem. But it's individual. Some people don't notice things, and some people are very, very sensitive to it. And then from there, I would always, again, because like I said at the very beginning, I'm always trying to get the most from the least. If 8 milligrams of ephedrine and 50 milligrams of caffeine worked, but now it's run its course, I wouldn't right away go to 25 and 200. Like I would just give a nominal bump. And I would really make the bump based on the convenience of what you've got. If there are 8 milligram tablets and 100 milligram caffeines, then maybe I go 1.5 and 1.5. Or maybe if my client says, no, I'm not going to spend time cutting them, then maybe you double it. It all depends on the effects it had. But I would always be trying to get more from less.
Is there a risk of addiction from any of these?
A risk of which?
Addiction.
That's a good question. I don't think an actual like an addiction as if like something like with nicotine, but I could be wrong. That's not really my expertise at all. But I do believe there is some sort of you're used to that effect, feeling that way, feeling or performing a certain way. I think that is somewhat addictive for people. Something I see with a lot of male athletes or bodybuilding, whatever, they'll do a course of steroids, get big, get lift heavy weights or whatever, and then stop and lose that. And that very much psychologically messes them up and they go right back on. It wasn't an addiction, like literally to the drug, but to the effects the drug caused. I don't know if that's classified as an addiction, to be honest. I'm not really sure how that works. But from a chemical point of view, not that I'm aware of, not with things like ephedrine or caffeine, no.
Yeah, it sounds more like body dysmorphia issue than actual addiction. So
There's definitely body dysmorphia in the fitness industry for sure, but there's a psychological effect to that sort of thing too, especially if they've experienced some sort of euphoric feeling. You know what I mean? Like the bodybuilder all of a sudden now thinks he's the porn star, and then comes off, and all of a sudden now it doesn't function. That's going to be more than body dysmorphia. That's going to be a psychological, bordering on psychological murder. You can right away want to jump back on, but I don't think that's classified as an addiction. But I don't know. That's a psychologist kind of playing field, I think.
Do you have any kind of like habitual alternatives that might help? Everything aside what you already said, like make sure your nutrition is in place, make sure your training is efficient, make sure you actually understand that more likely than not, you need to just fall in love with the math of all this because it's in and out. You just need to kind of okay, you can take over, I can take over, anyone else can take over, but you need to understand that that process is important. Is there anything else that you can tell people to add as an alternative to improving their fat loss goals? Like you said, hey, if you fly somewhere really sunny, you might get better or worse results. Is there anything like that that people can use in their advantage? Maybe they need to focus on these kind of things at specific time of the year or anything like that. Is it easier to lose body fat in the summer than in winter or whatever else there could be that people can take advantage of instead of paying their hard-earned money to just put some other thing and more strain on their body to get same exact result if they could do it a little bit easier if different environment was in place.
I think I understand what you're saying. Yes, there would be lifestyle things that could improve everything. Nothing can trump the speed and power of a drug. Like, I mean, if you're willing to create a lifestyle that establishes these habits that then help with the goal, that's going to work. There's no doubt about it. But that's going to be routines and consistency. That's the key. Where you could literally just drop a drug and drop a hammer and do it, and that's why people do that. Um, but things like weather, yes, I mean sunshine and stuff like that. If you're always in the dark, if you're living where I live now, and sunlight's going to be much less, that can have an effect. Um, David Herrera does a lot of stuff with the circadian rhythm and on light on stuff. I would listen to his stuff, his channel. That's more his area of expertise for sure. But that stuff all matters. But to me, that's all. I kind of just umbrella that all under lifestyle stuff. Like, I mean, the easiest, most impactful thing, but it's not going to show you a result today, is making sure you've got quality sleep, as much quality sleep as you can get. I would say quality trumps quantity any day, but I would say as much quality sleep as you can get. And I still lean on the nutrition aspect. If the body's fueled appropriately, it won't cause a lot of the downregulated adaptations that happen that you see all the time that require you to be drugging and supplementing to fix. So if those two things, which to me are very easy to accomplish, are in place, that's sort of the lifestyle habit. Obviously, if you can reduce stress, if you can get more sleep, if you get more sunlight, all these things accumulate, but that's all long-term routines or consistency of the routines.
Yeah, that sounds worth exploring
Yeah,
for sure
definitely.
because more often than not, it's hey, what can I take, and less of what can I do.
I 100% agree. And that whole what can I take to me is a red flag. Anytime I have anybody looking for coaching and the first thing is like, what can I take to do this? I already know if we back this up, I don't know how many steps, we'll find the route. And then from there, we can work ahead and start making progress without drugging everything.
Yeah, this has been really good. I'm mindful of your time. I'm gonna let you off soon, and some things you touched up. Maybe in future videos we can touch up on like a hard hitters on like illegal things or
Yep.
on things and whatnot, and explores that side, why people have gone that route, what was attractive about there, why these things got banned, why is it so risky? Because everything we do is risk reward ratio, like
Yep. 100%.
so we talked of camera, like some things I was doing at 17, I'm not going to do now because I'm just way more bigger than I was before. And the risk of me even training the way I did when I was 76 and 80 kilos body weight.
Right.
Now, if I do something wrong, I will be crippled. Whereas at that body weight, body size, you do something wrong and you recover in a couple of weeks. So, but appreciate your time, Scott, as usual. And
Oh, my pleasure.
I'll see you next video.
All right. Thanks.